Do you know what one of the most essential pieces of backpacking gear is that is often overlooked and possibly underrated in terms of how much it contributes to the success of your thru hike? You're right, we're talking about shoes. So I have a little confession to make. You might think I'm crazy, but I was thinking about you all when I was in the shower this morning. I'm getting ready to go to work at the Outfitter where I'm doing part-time work in between my thru hikes this year. And I got to thinking about shoes and particularly how important they are for your thru hike, with so many people getting ready to start their Appalachian Trail thru hikes this year and PCT thru hikes over the course of the next couple of months. So when I finished getting ready and I looked at my watch and I thought, I've got time. So what better time than the present to share with you some tips and advice for finding the right footwear for your hike, and particularly the best hiking shoes for you personally so that you can have an amazing adventure. We're going to start talking about that right now. Just like tires on your car being one of the most important pieces of equipment that you can have because they keep you in contact with the road and make your vehicle perform well, having the right shoes for a thru hike or for any hike at all for that matter can make an amazing difference. Shoes are so important because they affect the way you step, they can affect your gait, they can affect your foot position, they give you stability, they give you cushioning, they actually help you bounce back as you're stepping on different surfaces, they give you grip and tread that keeps you from slipping if you've got the right shoes. They help you to align your whole body, so not just your feet, but what happens with your knees and your hips and your back as you're hiking, particularly with a load that may range from anywhere from 15 to possibly 40 plus pounds. Finding the right shoe when you're going to be hiking for miles and miles a day, anywhere from 10 to 30 miles a day, depending on your hiking style, and hiking for months on end, it's absolutely critical for you to get the right shoes that are going to support your body throughout that hike. Now, I'm coming to you with the voice of experience because when I hiked the Appalachian Trail, I, first of all, did a ton of training and I tried out lots of shoes before I started that thru hike. I settled on Saucony Peregrines, partly because they have a really good grip. They were very comfortable, very flexible. They had a rock plate inside them to protect me from rocky trails. And I thought that I was golden. I was ready. I was good to go. I actually think I bought like 3 pairs of those because you wear out shoes every 400 or 500 miles when you're doing a hike like the Appalachian Trail. But pretty soon, within probably 2 weeks of being on the trail, I started having foot issues that just never went away. And I stopped. I saw a doctor in Damascus during trail days. I stopped in Great Barrington in Massachusetts and went and had my foot looked at, and nobody could really tell me what it was.
So I just left the urgent care center with a couple of ace bandages and some ibuprofen. They really couldn't give me an answer as to why I'm having so much pain. The x-ray did not show a break. So other than going home and going to my orthopedist and maybe getting an MRI, the only recommendation they provided was the RICE formula, rest, ice, compression, elevation, which is what I've been doing. And so unfortunately very frustrating to not have answers and not really know what to do, when it might get better, or what the prognosis for my hike is.
There are 2 big ailments that you hear about on the trail, and one is plantar fasciitis and the other is Achilles tendonitis. And some of the doctors I talked to kind of went, well, could be either one. Not helpful at all. Some diagnosed me with one, some diagnosed me with the others, but basically they were all kind of scratching their head. And the response that I got universally, anytime I had somebody look at this, was, well, just take a few days off trail and you'll feel better. I did that. I took days off in Hot Springs, where I also went to a doctor in Hot Springs. Took time off in Hot Springs. I took time off in Great Barrington. I had to go home for a family emergency, so I was off the trail for a few days there. That never helped. My feet might feel a little bit better while I was off the trail, but then when I got back on again, they started hurting again. And that is not the way to do a thru hike. Let me tell you, this is an experience of a lifetime, and if you think you're only going to do it once, you do not want to be spending half of your thru hike worrying about your feet and the other half hoping that they get better, right? This is why I'm sharing this with you, because I think it's just really important to find the right shoes before you start if you can, and if you end up having problems early in the hike, that you can find better shoes pretty quickly. Now, heeding that advice to try different shoes, I picked up some 𝐒𝐲𝐻, actually much sturdier boots, because they're not boots, but they were trail shoes versus trail runners. And I thought, well, maybe going to a stiffer shoe, because the Saucony shoe is a much lighter shoe. It's got a lot of flex to it. It's very light. You can feel the earth, which is something that I like. But I thought perhaps I need a little bit more structure and a more solid shoe to help me out. That lasted not even 2 weeks. Very quickly, I realized that although those shoes felt great in the store, when I got back on trail with them and started hiking, they were awful. And I had to get rid of them as fast as I possibly could. Thankfully, I had kept my old shoes. I carried them with me during that time because I just wasn't 100% sure. And I ended up shipping the new shoes back and putting on the old shoes. When I got to Damascus, I was kind of debating, well, you know, should I try some different shoes? And so I did. I picked up a pair of Altra Lone Peaks, which you probably are familiar with those. They're one of the very top rated shoes for through hiking, but they don't work for everybody. I had a problem where my feet tend to be a little bit narrow and they felt like clown shoes. And you do not want shoes that feel like clown shoes. You don't want to be flopping around on the trail. You want shoes that fit you well. They should be, and I'll show you on the shoe again, they should be snug in the heel. You don't really want any slipping here, maybe just a tiny little bit. And if you do have that problem, you can do what's called heel lock lacing, where you put the lace through here like that, and then bring the other lace across, thread it through, and do it that way. And then you can tighten up the shoe a little bit more to prevent some slipping. So anyway, Altras are a much wider shoe. They have a very wide toe box. If you have wide feet, they might work great for you. But since my feet were more narrow, they didn't work. And I also, at least the pair that I had, it kind of started coming apart pretty quickly. I mean, within 2-3 weeks on the trail, the toe here was splitting. And there was just a lot of issues where I felt like the quality of the shoe at that time was not what I expected it to be for a through hike. So I had another pair of 𝐒𝐻𝐞𝐬s at home. I tossed the Altras as soon as I could get the 𝐒𝐻𝐞𝐬s sent to me. And I kept wearing this shoe and kept having pain. When I reached about the halfway point of the trail, I went home for that family emergency, and I went to an outfitter there and tried a different pair of shoes. And I wore them around for the week that I was in town and decided, no, those aren't going to work either. So basically, I was having a terrible time finding the right shoes. And you might be looking at this video thinking, well, that's a personal problem, Joey, but it's not. It's something that I know a lot of hikers go through, and this is why I'm sharing my experience with you. Eventually, I decided to try a shoe that my brother had picked up. He came to visit me in Trail Days, and La Sportiva had a booth at Trail Days, and they were selling off shoes that were, I think, maybe had been returned or something like that for about 30 bucks. So he picked up a pair of these really pretty, not really pretty shoes. And we had hiked together for a little bit after that. He stayed and hiked on the trail with me for a few days, and he was loving them. So I had also seen a lot of other hikers with those shoes, and they seemed to say good things about them. So I thought, okay, well, let me just try the La Sportivas. Unfortunately, at that point, they didn't make the women's version in a size that was large enough for me. And these are an Italian shoe, so because they're European, they tend to run a little bit smaller. My regular shoe size is 8.5 to 9, going up a little bit to give me more room, and you typically want to do that, especially with trail runners, is to get a shoe that's a little bit bigger. I was wearing like a 9.5 in the 𝐒𝐻𝐞𝐬s. I had to go to a European 42.5, which is actually a 10.5, and I had to get the men's shoes. So I was rocking these little babies down the trail. I also made another change around the same time, and that was to get insoles. Very early in my hike, another hiker had talked about the 𝐓𝐴𝐸𝐼, and this is the 𝐓𝐴𝐸𝐼 insole. And I thought, well, why not? I mean, at first I was like, well, they're not as expensive, so maybe they're not as good, right? But I picked up a pair and I put those in my La Sportivas, and miraculously my foot issues disappeared. So I attribute it both to the shoe and also the insole, and this one is kind of dirty, but if you haven't used insoles before, you typically can trim them to fit. So I had to trim this to fit the insole, or to match the insole that actually came out of the shoe. And they tend to last, at least for me, about as long as a pair of shoes does. So that's why I have a brand new pair right now, because I just got a brand new pair of La Sportivas for my next through hike, which is coming up in a few weeks now. But you can see they get pretty run down. And this has some padding in the heel, and that's mainly where I was having issues. And it's got some stability around the arch. There's a nice arch support here. So I think that this was the combination of things that I needed, coupled with a shoe that fit me better. I mean, the 𝐒𝐻𝐞𝐬s, there's nothing wrong with them, and I actually still love them for day hikes and shorter hikes. But for long distance, for that repetitive motion day in and day out over miles and miles, the La Sportiva gives me a little bit more structure, and it still has the nice wide toe box for me. It's got enough room for my toes to splay. And I don't slip and slide inside. And just like These are a little bit worn down, but just like the 𝐒𝐡𝐚𝐳 that have a lot of grip, �La is known for making climbing shoes, and these are super, super grippy. This pair is really, I only wear it to work now, basically, because they've had their trail life sucked out of them. But I wanted a super grippy shoe because I was really struggling with the rocks. And the year that I hiked the AT, it was super rainy and things were really slippery, and I just was really having some challenges around that. So I wanted to make sure I got some super grippy shoes, and the La Sportivas absolutely were nice and grippy. So now that you've heard my story, what should you be looking for when you are buying a shoe? As I mentioned, you want to have a toe box that's wide enough where your toes can splay, because as you step, your toes kind of spread out like that a little bit. You don't want to have slipping in the heel. You want to have the appropriate amount of arch support. And so this is where it pays to actually get your feet measured by somebody who knows something about hiking shoes. And that you want to have, like, if you've got a high-low arch or a low arch, then you're going to want to pick a shoe that's appropriate for the level of arch that you have, so you have the support that you need. I actually eventually came down, and this was on the PCT and not the AT, but I came down with posterior tibial tendinitis, which is the tendon that supports your arch. And if you have an issue like that, you need to be super careful about having the right level of support, because that can get bad enough where your arch just collapses, and you do not want that. That will potentially end your hiking career. So you want to make sure that you've got a good toe box, good fit around the heel, that you've got the right arch support, and then also that the shoes are comfortable. You want to look for shoes that are going to dry quickly, because on a through hike, odds are you're going to get wet from rain or possibly even just doing creek crossings if you don't change your shoes. And I usually don't. I just power through because I know my shoes are going to dry really quickly. And then also look at things like the type of foam and the materials that are used on the shoe. You see a lot of people wearing Hoka's, which are great shoes, but because they've got so much of that foam, it does tend to break down quicker. And with a shoe like that, you're probably going to go through more pairs than you would with a more sturdy construction of a shoe. Nothing wrong with that. That cushioning is great. It feels awesome, and that might be what you need. And that reminds me of another point, because everybody's feet are different. Everybody's body is different. Their feet are different. So what works for me is not necessarily what's going to work for you. What works for your friends and what's most popular is not necessarily what's going to work for you. So you've got to find the right shoe for your feet and for your gait and your body type and all those kinds of things. And that might mean that you have to try, 4 or 5 different pairs of shoes before you settle on some that are ideal for you for through hiking. Now, on the note of boots, a lot of people are still stuck on boots and hiking shoes, which I find they're okay for certain circumstances. But personally, I think for through hiking, a trail runner is a better shoe, because it's got that nice cushion, it's got spring back, it's flexible, it dries quickly, and it's a lot lighter too. So that, that extra weight on your feet over 15 miles a day is going to make a difference. When you find a shoe that you like I did with the Peregrines, you might be tempted to just say, okay, this is my favorite shoe. I'm going to buy 4 of them, enough for my whole through hike, right? And I tried that, but unfortunately I couldn't get the model. With the Peregrines, every year they roll the number. So I think I started in Peregrine 6, and then they rolled to 7, and the 7 they had made changes to, and 𝐒𝐡𝐚𝐳 apparently does this quite frequently with their shoes. It might be the same model, but it's different from year to year. So if you can't get the same shoe, you might find out that now suddenly what worked for you before does not work anymore. And that was part of my problem, is that when I got that last pair sent to me, they were a different model and they didn't work so well. This one, I think they're now up to maybe 12 or 13. And I picked it up when I was cruising through Salida on the Colorado Trail. Actually, I had gone back to visit, and they had them on sale at a running store because they were the prior year season. And I thought, well, I'll pick those up because I can use them for day hikes and training and that sort of thing. Two issues to be mindful of if you want to stock up and buy a shoe. One, it's great if you can get the same model, and if you can afford to buy them all at once, that's awesome. But you might find as your feet change, because your feet too tend to spread and even grow when you're hiking big miles like that over a long period of time. So you might find out that the shoe that works at the end of the hike is not what worked for you at the beginning. And you might also find that shoes, after a certain period of time, if they're not used, and this really shouldn't happen during the course of your through hike, but if you put them in the closet and you let them sit there for 2 years, you might find that they have dry rot and they start to come apart. The sole might start to come off. Some of the glues might degrade. And so don't buy a bunch of shoes because you love them and you think you can stockpile them for 5 years, because that's probably not going to work out for you. It will end up being a waste of money, which is not a good thing. For any frugal hiker, that is not a good thing. In my case, I've been very lucky, because La Sportiva, after a couple years, decided they should start making these larger shoes in women's sizes, and now I've got some really pretty ones that I like a lot. I was unlucky because these guys now retail for $175, and I think I'm on my 7th or 8th pair. And so that's like well over probably $1,500 that I've spent on hiking shoes. But at the same time, just like getting a good set of tires and not a cheap set of tires for your car that's going to give you that traction and stability, having the right shoes that give you the traction and stability you need for hiking is vital. And so I don't mind paying, but I also know that I can find them on sale periodically. Sometimes they'll be 30% off, sometimes even 50% off if there's a closeout on a past year model.
Now, the La Sportiva model that I really like is the 𝐒𝐲. They make several others, so you might want to try a few if you're looking at that particular shoe. And that's a tip just for any shoe. You might find a brand that you like, but the model's not working. So it makes sense to try a few different models in a line if you really do like a particular manufacturer.
So I have found a shoe that I love, and I hope that you will also be able to find a shoe that you love that will see you through many, many miles on the trail. And don't forget to take out the stock insoles. I took them out of here, and replace them with something better, whatever brand it is that works for you. These 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐬 that I mentioned run about, I think, $35, $40 a pair, so they're pretty reasonable. And again, if you go for higher end insoles or even custom insoles, that's okay if it keeps your feet in good shape and helps you to hike further, hike happier, and really enjoy your adventures. So thanks for being with me, and I hope that if you have not yet subscribed, that you'll take a minute to subscribe down below, and I'll look forward to seeing you here again next time.